I can't afford soup for my mom. Well, then you need to go back and get enough money and come back here, the cafeteria worker said, already turning her head toward the next person in line. You're holding up the line. I need to help the next customer. The little girl didn't move right away. Then she stepped to the side so the next person could order. The line moved forward. Trays sliding. People talking. The world continuing like nothing had happened. The girl moved to a small empty spot near the napkin stand. She put her paper cup down on the counter, unzipped her coat pocket, and started digging inside, her small fingers searching every corner like there might be hidden money she had forgotten. She pulled out a few coins, then a few more. Then she checked the other pocket. She even checked the small inside pocket, the one with a broken zipper, carefully pushing her fingers inside to make sure nothing was stuck in the corner. Finally, she placed all the coins on the counter and began counting them again, very slowly, very carefully. 1, 2, 3, 350, 375. She stopped, counted again from the beginning. 1, 2, 3, 350, 375. Her shoulders dropped just a little. She picked up the coins and walked back to the counter, waiting until the cashier finished with another customer. Ma'am, she said softly, I counted again, but I really still don't have enough money to buy one bowl of soup. The cashier looked at the coins, then at the girl, then at the growing line behind her. Her expression softened for a second, but only for a second. I told you, sweetheart, she said, not unkindly but firmly. It's $5 for a bowl. I can't change the price. The girl nodded slowly. Then she asked, very politely, could you maybe sell me half a bowl of soup? I only have this much money. She opened her hand so the woman could see the coins. My mom is sick, and she can only eat soup. Half a bowl is okay. She won't mind. I can't sell half bowls, the cashier replied. I'm sorry. That's the rule. The girl stood there for a moment, holding the coins in her open palm. People behind her shifted impatiently. Someone sighed. She closed her hand around the coins again and whispered, almost to herself, okay. I understand. She turned slightly, like she was about to walk away. That was when she felt a very gentle tap on her shoulder. She turned around. A tall white man in a dark wool coat stood behind her. He looked about 40. In one hand, he held a bottle of water he hadn't paid for yet. I'm sorry, he said gently. I couldn't help overhearing. Did you say you don't have enough money to buy soup for your mom? The girl hesitated for a moment. Then she stepped a little closer to him. She opened her hand and showed him all the coins she had. Sir, can you help me buy soup for my mom? She asked quietly. This is all the money I have. You can take all of it. She pushed the coins toward him with both hands. My name is Annie. If you help me today, when I grow up and have money, I will pay you back. I promise. The man looked down at the coins in her small hands. $3.75. Not even enough for a full meal. Not even enough for most things in this building. Why are you the one buying food? He asked gently. Where is your father? Annie was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller. My mom got very sick last year, she said. She couldn't work anymore. We didn't have enough money. My dad said he couldn't live like that. Then he left. She swallowed and looked down at the coins in her hand. He left with another woman. She had a big house and a nice car. After that, my mom got more sick. The man didn't move. He didn't say anything. Annie kept talking. My mom cries at night when she thinks I'm sleeping, Annie said quietly. She says she's sorry I have to grow up so fast. But it's okay. I can help. I can buy food. I can stay with her at the hospital. I just don't have enough money today. She lifted the coins again, like proof. I paid half of the hospital bill already with the money my mom saved. She continued. The rest we have to save slowly, so we don't buy food here. But today we don't have any food left. This is all I have. For a long moment, the man just looked at her. Something in his face changed something heavy. Something like regret. Like he was thinking about things he could not undo. You were really going to give me all your money? He asked. Annie nodded. Yes, sir. You can take it. I just need the soup. Then she added again, very seriously. My name is Annie. When I grow up and have money, I will find you and pay you back. I promise." He gently closed her fingers over the coins and pushed her hand back toward her. "Keep your money, Annie," he said quietly. "I'll buy the soup." Her eyes widened slightly. "Really? Really?" She thought for a moment, then nodded. "Then it's a deal," she said. "When I grow up and have money, I will pay you back." "I believe you," he said. He stepped up to the counter. "1 chicken soup," he told the cashier. "And I'll take this water." The cashier rang it up. He paid, then handed the large paper bowl to Annie. Steam slipped out from under the lid, and Annie held it carefully with both hands like it was something very precious. "Thank you, sir," she said softly. "My mom will be very happy. She hasn't eaten since yesterday." "What room is she in?" he asked. 712, Annie said. "I have to take this up before it gets cold." "I'm going that way," he said. "I'll walk with you." They walked to the elevators together. Annie held the soup close to her chest the entire time, like she was protecting it from the cold, from the air, from the world. Inside the elevator, he pressed the button for the 7th floor. "She must be a very good mom," he said after a moment, "if you're trying this hard just to bring her soup." Annie looked down at the bowl in her hands. "She is," she said quietly. "She used to bring me soup when I was sick. Now it's my turn." The elevator doors opened on the 7th floor. Annie walked out into the long hallway, and he followed a few steps behind. She stopped at room 712 and pushed the door open with her shoulder. "Mom," she said softly as she walked in, "I got you chicken soup. It's still hot." From the doorway, the man saw a thin woman lying in the hospital bed, an oxygen tube beneath her nose. The woman turned her head slowly when she heard Annie's voice, and when she saw her daughter holding the soup, she smiled in a way that made the whole room feel warmer. "You didn't have to spend money on me," the woman said gently. "It's okay," Annie said, carefully opening the lid and blowing on the soup to cool it. "You need to eat so you can get strong and come home." Only then did the woman notice the man standing quietly at the door. She looked at him, confused but polite. "Can I help you?" she asked. The man looked at her for a long moment. There was something familiar about her face, something he couldn't quite remember yet, but he felt it immediately, like a memory trying to find its way back. "I'm not sure," he said slowly, "but I think I might want to try." Annie carefully stirred the soup with a plastic spoon, blowing on it the way her mother must have once done for her. She tested a small spoonful against her lip, making sure it wasn't too hot, then lifted it gently to her mother's mouth. "Slowly," Annie said softly. "It's still hot." Her mother smiled faintly and took a small sip. Even that seemed to take effort. "Did you eat?" her mother asked after swallowing. Annie nodded quickly. "Yes, Mom." William, standing by the door, could tell that was a lie. He had seen the coins. He had seen the way she looked at the soup. The woman in the bed noticed his shadow before she fully turned her head again. "Sir, can I help you?" she asked politely, though her voice carried the quiet caution of someone who had learned that unexpected visitors often meant problems, bills, paperwork, bad news. William stepped a little closer, but still kept a respectful distance. "I'm sorry to intrude," he said. "I met your daughter downstairs in the cafeteria." The woman looked at Annie, confused. Annie looked down at the soup like she had been caught doing something wrong. "He helped me buy the soup," Annie said quietly. "I told him I will pay him back when I grow up." The woman closed her eyes for a brief moment, and when she opened them again, there was embarrassment there. "I'm sorry," she said to William. "She shouldn't have asked you for money." "I didn't give her money," William said. "I bought soup. There's a difference." The woman looked at him more carefully now, as if she were trying to understand what kind of man would say something like that. "Thank you," she said finally. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he replied. For a moment, the room was quiet, except for the soft sound of the oxygen machine and the distant noise of carts moving in the hallway. "What's your name?" William asked. "Sarah," she said. "Sarah Williams." He nodded slowly, as if confirming something to himself. "I'm William," he said. He did not say his last name. Annie fed her mother another spoonful of soup. She was very patient, waiting between each spoonful, watching her mother's face to make sure she wasn't too tired. "You should eat too," Sarah said weakly. "I'm not hungry," Annie replied automatically. William walked over to the small tray table and picked up a packet of crackers that had been left unopened. He placed it next to Annie. "You should still eat," he said gently. "People who take care of others still have to eat." Annie looked at the crackers, then at him, then nodded once. "Thank you, sir." Sarah watched this exchange very quietly. Then she said, "Annie, why don't you go fill the water bottle? The nurse said we should keep it full." Annie understood immediately that her mother wanted to speak to the man alone. She slid off the chair, carefully set the soup down, and picked up the plastic water bottle. "I'll be right back," she said, and walked out into the hallway. When the door closed, the room felt even smaller. Sarah looked at William for a long moment. "You're not just a man who happened to be in the cafeteria, are you?" she asked quietly. William did not answer right away. He looked at the chart at the end of her bed, at the stack of papers on the small table, at the envelope with the hospital logo that had been opened and folded too many times. "I own a construction company," he said finally. "Carter Group." He saw the moment she recognized the name. "I thought so," she said softly. "You know the company?" he asked. She gave a small, tired smile. "I used to work for your company," she said. "Accounting department." 5 years ago, William felt something heavy settle in his chest. "What happened?" he asked. She looked toward the door, making sure Annie was still gone, then back at him. "I got sick," she said. "At first it was just small things. I missed a few days, then more days. I couldn't keep up with the hours. When you work in accounting for a big company, if you're not fast, if you're not perfect, they replace you." She paused, catching her breath. "I lost my job. I lost the insurance. After that, everything got harder." William listened without interrupting. "My husband said he couldn't live like that," she continued. "He said he didn't sign up to be poor." A few months later, he met a woman who had money. Real money. Big house. Nice cars. Vacations. He packed a suitcase and left. She looked down at her hands. He never came back. William didn't know what to say. "I tried to work from home," Sarah said. "Small bookkeeping jobs. Anything. But when you're sick, really sick, even sitting at a table for 8 hours feels like climbing a mountain." She looked toward the door again. "Annie started helping me. At first just small things, then bigger things. She shouldn't have to live like this." William looked at the half-empty soup bowl on the tray. "How long have you been in the hospital?" he asked. 3 weeks this time," she said. "But I've been in and out for a year." "And the bills?" he asked quietly. She gave a small laugh, but there was no humor in it. "The bills don't get sick," she said. "They come every month, no matter what." He nodded slowly. "She told me she paid half already," he said. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment. "I had some savings," she said. "Not much. I told her we used it for the hospital so she wouldn't worry about food. I thought I had more time to figure things out." Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "I didn't think it would get this bad." William stood there, looking at the woman in the bed, at the empty chair where Annie had been sitting, at the soup that had cost less than $7 but somehow felt like the most important purchase he had made in years. "When Annie told me she would pay me back when she grows up," he said slowly. "She sounded very sure." Sarah smiled faintly. "She always keeps her promises," she said. "That's what scares me." He looked at her. "Why does that scare you?" "Because children who keep promises like that," she said quietly, "usually had to grow up too early to make them." If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a comment telling us where you are watching from, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story. Your support helps us share more stories about kindness, courage, and quiet heroes. At that moment, the door opened, and Annie came back in, carefully carrying the water bottle so she wouldn't spill. "I filled it all the way," she said proudly. Sarah smiled at her. William looked at Annie, then at Sarah, and in that moment, without saying it out loud yet, he made a decision that would change all 3 of their lives. William did not leave right away after Annie returned with the water. He stayed for a few more minutes, long enough to watch the rhythm between mother and daughter, long enough to understand that this was not a temporary situation. This was their life. Annie adjusted the pillow behind her mother's back without being asked. She checked the IV line the way she had probably seen nurses do. She reminded her mother to take small sips of water between spoonfuls of soup. She did all of this with the quiet confidence of someone who had done it many times before. After a while, William stepped back toward the door. "I should let you rest," he said. Sarah nodded. "Thank you again for the soup." "It was just soup," he said. But as he walked out into the hallway, he knew it wasn't just soup, not for them. He did not go back to his meeting upstairs right away. Instead, he walked slowly down the hallway, past nurses' stations and waiting rooms, until he found a quiet corner near a window that looked out over the gray Chicago afternoon. Cars moved slowly below like small pieces in a machine that never stopped running. He took out his phone and made a call. "Margaret, it's William," he said when the line picked up. "I need you to look into a former employee, accounting department. Name is Sarah Williams. She worked for us about 5 years ago. I want her full employment file, medical insurance history, termination paperwork, everything." There was a pause on the other end. Margaret had been his executive assistant for 12 years. She knew his voice well enough to recognize when something was different. "Is this for legal?" she asked. "No," he said. "This is for me." Another pause. "All right," she said. "I'll start pulling records. And Margaret," he added, "don't route this through HR yet. I want to see it first." He ended the call and stood there for a long moment, looking out the window but not really seeing the city. For most of his life, problems had been things you solved with money, lawyers, or meetings. But this didn't feel like that kind of problem. This felt older than that. Quieter. The kind of problem that sits in the corner of a room and waits for you to notice it. Back in room 712, Annie was finishing the last few spoonfuls of soup with her mother. "You should eat the rest," Sarah said. "I'm full." Annie shook her head. "You need it more." "I'm not as hungry as you think," Sarah said gently. Annie hesitated, then slowly took a small spoonful for herself. She tried to make it look like she wasn't very hungry, but the way she ate quickly, carefully, like she didn't know when she would eat again, told a different story. "Mom," Annie said after a moment, "that man is nice." Sarah looked at the door. "Yes," she said. "He is." "Do you think he's rich?" Annie asked. Sarah almost smiled. "Why do you ask that?" "Because he didn't look at the price when he paid," Annie said. "Rich people don't look at prices." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Maybe," she said. "If he's rich," Annie continued, "then maybe he's very busy. Rich people are always busy in movies." Sarah reached out and gently brushed Annie's hair back from her face. "Not all busy people are important," she said softly. "And not all important people are kind." Annie thought about that. "I think he's kind," she said. Sarah looked toward the door again, her expression thoughtful, almost worried. That evening, after Annie had fallen asleep in the chair beside the bed, her head resting on her folded arms, Sarah watched her daughter sleep and thought about the man who had stood in the doorway. William Carter. She remembered the name from years ago, from emails and company memos, and once from a company-wide meeting where he had spoken about growth and safety and responsibility. He had been younger then, but the eyes were the same, focused, distant, like he was always thinking about the next problem that needed solving. She wondered if he knew what had happened after she lost her job. She wondered if he knew how fast a life could fall apart once health insurance disappeared. The next morning, William arrived at his office earlier than usual. His building stood tall over downtown Chicago, all glass and steel, the kind of building that made people walk a little faster when they passed it. Margaret was already waiting with a folder when he walked in. "You weren't kidding about wanting everything," she said, handing it to him. This took some digging. He took the folder and sat down at his desk. The leather chair, the city view, the quiet office, it all felt very far away from room 712. He opened the file. Sarah Williams, accounting department, employed, 4 years, 8 months. Position, accounts payable specialist. Insurance, company health plan. Termination, medical inability to fulfill duties. He kept reading. There were notes about extended sick leave. Notes about reduced hours. Notes about missed days. Then the termination letter, formal, polite, full of words like regret and policy, and company standards. He read it twice, then he looked at the insurance section again. Coverage terminated 30 days after employment ended. He leaned back in his chair and stared at the paper. 30 days. 30 days between having treatment and having nothing. He thought about the hospital room, the oxygen tube, the unpaid bills in the envelope, the little girl counting coins for soup. He picked up the phone again. "Margaret," he said when she answered, "I need you to find out how much of Sarah Williams' hospital bill is still unpaid." There was a pause. "William, we don't usually. I know what we usually do," he said quietly. "Just find out." He hung up and looked down at the file again. On the last page was a small note from a supervisor written years ago. "Sarah is one of the most honest employees we have. Very careful with numbers. Never makes mistakes." He read that line 3 times. Never makes mistakes. William closed the folder slowly. For the first time in a very long time, he had the uncomfortable feeling that something had gone very wrong somewhere inside his company. And he had never seen it because he had been too busy looking at bigger numbers, bigger deals, bigger problems. And now the cost of that blindness was sitting in a hospital bed on the 7th floor, while her daughter counted coins for soup downstairs. The number Margaret gave him that afternoon stayed in William's head long after the phone call ended. He had asked a simple question. How much of Sarah Williams' hospital bill was still unpaid? He expected a number that was uncomfortable but manageable, the kind of number that could be solved with a signature and a transfer and a quiet conversation with the billing department. But the number he heard was not that kind of number. It was the kind of number that changes how people sleep at night. He hung up the phone and sat very still at his desk, looking out over the city without really seeing it. Somewhere down there, people were walking, working, buying coffee, arguing about parking tickets, living ordinary days. And 7 floors up in street, Mary's hospital, a woman who had once worked for his company was lying in a bed, and her daughter was counting coins for soup. He opened Sarah's file again and reread the termination letter. The language was clean, professional, legally safe. It said the company regretted that due to her inability to perform her duties at the required level, her position had been terminated. It thanked her for her years of service. It wished her well in the future. There was no line in the letter that said, "You will lose your health insurance in 30 days. There was no line that said, "If you get really sick, there will be no one to help you." There was no line that said, "Your child might one day have to count coins for soup." William closed the file and pressed his fingers against his eyes for a moment. He was not a man who was easily surprised. In business, he had seen lawsuits, bankruptcies, accidents, men lie to his face and shake his hand in the same minute. But this felt different. This felt like something quiet and cruel that had happened slowly while everyone important was looking somewhere else. That evening, instead of going home, he went back to the hospital. The cafeteria was quieter now, the dinner rush almost over. The same cashier was there. She recognized him immediately. "Back again?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "2 soups this time, and 2 sandwiches." She rang it up without asking questions. People who worked in hospitals learned quickly that there were stories behind almost everything, and it was kinder not to ask unless someone wanted to tell you. When he got to room 712, Annie was sitting in the chair again, doing homework on a piece of paper balanced on her knees. Her tongue stuck out slightly in concentration as she wrote. She looked up when he knocked lightly on the door frame. Her face lit up with recognition. "You came back," she said, surprised. "I said I might," he replied. He held up the bag. "I brought dinner." Annie looked at the bag, then at him. "You don't have to keep buying us food," she said, very serious again. "I know," he said, "but I was buying my own dinner anyway. It turns out I don't like eating alone." Sarah watched this exchange quietly from the bed. "That's a good reason," she said softly. William set the food on the tray table and handed Annie one of the sandwiches. "This one is yours," he said. "Not for sharing." "Yours." Annie hesitated. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." She unwrapped the sandwich slowly, like she didn't want the moment to end too quickly. After the first bite, she closed her eyes for just a second. William pretended not to notice. Sarah ate only a little, but more than the day before. Some color had come back to her face, though she still looked very tired. "You didn't have to come back," she said to William after a while. "Yes," he said, "I did." She looked at him carefully. Why? He thought about that question before answering. He could have said something easy, something polite. But for some reason, he didn't want to lie in this room. "Because I think something happened to you that shouldn't have happened," he said, "and I think my company might be part of the reason." The room went very quiet. Annie looked from him to her mother, not fully understanding, but understanding enough to know this was important. Sarah held his gaze for a long moment. "There are a lot of things in this world that shouldn't happen," she said quietly. "Yes," he replied, "but that doesn't mean we're not responsible when they do." She looked down at her hands. "I don't want charity," she said. "I'm not offering charity," he said. "I'm trying to understand if we made a mistake." She gave a small, tired smile. "Big companies don't make mistakes," she said. "They make policies, and policies don't have faces, so they don't feel guilty." William leaned back slightly in the chair. "Companies are just people," he said. "And people make mistakes all the time." Annie spoke up quietly from the chair. "Are you in trouble?" she asked William. He looked at her, surprised. "Why would I be in trouble?" "Because when grown-ups talk like this," Annie said, "it usually means someone is in trouble." For a moment, neither adult spoke. Then William smiled a little. The first real smile Annie had seen from him. "Maybe I should be," he said. Annie thought about that while chewing her sandwich. Then she said, "If you're in trouble, you can sit with us. My mom says it's better when people are not alone when they're in trouble." Sarah looked at her daughter, then at William. "I did say that," she admitted softly. William looked around the small hospital room again. The thin blanket, the old chair where Annie slept, the stack of bills, the half-finished homework, the plastic cup of water, the smell of soup and disinfectant. He had been in boardrooms worth millions of dollars, had signed deals that changed entire neighborhoods, had fired men and hired men and built things that touched the sky. But sitting in this small room, he had the strange, uncomfortable feeling that this quiet room with a sick woman and a little girl who kept her promises was the place where the most important decision of his life was about to be made. "I think," he said slowly, "I would like to help fix what went wrong." Sarah looked at him carefully. "Why?" she asked again. But this time her voice was softer, less guarded. William thought about Annie counting coins, about the line in the file that said never makes mistakes, about 30 days of insurance that had run out years ago but was still costing someone everything. "Because," he said quietly, "somewhere along the way, I forgot that the numbers on my reports are actually people. And I think your daughter just reminded me." The next morning, Annie woke up before her mother did. She had learned to sleep lightly in hospitals. The machines made noises at night. Nurses came in and out. And sometimes her mother coughed in a way that made Annie sit up in the chair and watch her chest rise and fall just to make sure she was still breathing normally. That morning, the sky outside the window was pale gray, the kind of gray that meant it was still very cold outside. Annie quietly folded the thin blanket she had used and placed it neatly on the chair. Then she walked to the sink, stood on her toes, and filled the plastic cup with water the way the nurse had shown her. She checked the IV bag, not because she fully understood it, but because she knew adults felt less worried when they saw someone paying attention. When Sarah opened her eyes, Annie was already sitting in the chair with her homework open. "You should be sleeping," Sarah said softly. "I already slept," Annie replied. "How do you feel?" Sarah thought for a moment before answering. "Better," she said, which was what she always said. Annie nodded like that was good enough. Around 9 o'clock, there was a knock on the door. Annie looked up, expecting a nurse. It was William. This time, he wasn't wearing the long, dark coat. He was dressed in a suit, like he was supposed to be somewhere important, but instead he was standing in their doorway holding a paper bag and 2 cups of coffee. "I wasn't sure what you liked," he said, walking in slowly. "So I guessed. Oatmeal for you," he said to Sarah, placing a container on the tray, "and a bagel for Annie." Annie looked at the bagel like it was a gift from another world. "Thank you," she said. William handed Sarah the oatmeal and then sat down in the chair by the window. "I spoke to the hospital billing department this morning," he said calmly. Sarah tensed slightly. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he said. "But I wanted to understand the situation." She didn't ask how he had gotten them to talk to him. Some questions were easier not to ask. "And," she said quietly, "and the number is too big for one person to carry alone," he said. She looked down at her hands. "I was trying," she said. "I really was." "I know," he replied. Annie looked between them, sensing the heaviness in the room but not fully understanding it. William reached into his jacket and took out a folder. Not a thick one, just a few papers. "I don't want to give you charity," he said. You were very clear about that. So I'm not going to. Sarah looked at him carefully. Then what is that? She asked. A job, he said. She blinked, not sure she had heard him correctly. Ayub, you worked in accounting for my company for almost 5 years, he said. Your record says you were one of the most careful employees they had. It also says you left because of medical issues. Not because you did anything wrong. That was a long time ago, she said quietly. I can't work full-time. Some days I can barely get out of bed. I'm not offering full-time, he said. I'm offering something you can do from home, part-time, reviewing expense reports, checking vendor invoices, the kind of work where being careful matters more than being fast. Sarah stared at the folder. Why? She asked again, but this time the question sounded different, less defensive, more confused. William thought for a moment before answering. When Annie asked me to help her buy soup, he said slowly. She offered me everything she had. $3.75. That was all the money in the world to her, and she was ready to give it away so her mother could eat. He looked at Annie, then back at Sarah. In business, people negotiate, they calculate, they protect themselves. Your daughter didn't do any of that. She just tried to take care of you. I think any company would be lucky to have an employee raised by someone like that. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away quickly. I don't want you to do this because you feel sorry for us, she said. I'm not, he replied. I'm doing this because I think letting a good employee disappear because she got sick was a mistake, and I don't like mistakes that hurt people if I can fix them. Annie spoke quietly from her chair. If my mom has a job, does that mean we can pay the hospital? William looked at her. Yes, he said. It means we can start solving things, one step at a time. Annie nodded slowly, like she understood that solving big problems happened in small steps. Sarah looked at the papers but didn't touch them yet. I don't even know if I'm strong enough, she said. You don't have to decide today, William said. Just read it when you feel better. He stood up and walked toward the door, then stopped and looked back at Annie. Did you finish your homework? He asked. Almost, Annie said. Good, he said, because people who keep their promises and do their homework usually end up running things one day. Annie smiled a little at that. After he left, Sarah picked up the folder with slow, careful hands, like she was afraid it might disappear if she moved too fast. Inside was a simple contract. Part-time. Remote work. Flexible hours. Medical insurance included. She stared at the last line for a long time. Medical insurance included. Her hands began to shake. Mom? Annie said softly. Sarah looked at her daughter, at the child who had tried to buy half a bowl of soup with a handful of coins and an adult's sense of responsibility. I think, Sarah said slowly, her voice unsteady, that man didn't just buy us soup. Annie tilted her head. What did he buy then? Sarah looked down at the contract again. I think, she said, he bought us time. William did not expect the contract to affect him the way it did. He had signed contracts worth millions of dollars without losing a minute of sleep. He had negotiated deals across long tables with men who smiled while trying to take everything they could from you. Contracts, to him, were tools, instruments, leverage, but this one had been different. When he added the line medical insurance included, he had stopped typing for a long time before finishing the document. Because he understood something now that he had not understood before. Insurance was not a line in a benefits package. It was not a number in a quarterly report. It was the difference between a woman getting treatment and a woman ending up in a hospital bed while her daughter counted coins for soup. The next few days settled into a quiet routine. William came by the hospital in the evenings, never making a big entrance, never staying too long. Sometimes he brought food. Sometimes he brought Annie a small notebook or pencils for school. Once, he brought a second-hand laptop and placed it on the table beside Sarah's bed. For the job, he said simply. Sarah looked at the laptop like it was something fragile and unbelievable. I don't even know if I remember how to log into half the systems, she said. You'd be surprised what people remember when they're given a reason, he replied. That night, after Annie fell asleep, Sarah opened the laptop and stared at the screen for a long time before typing her old employee login. She was sure it wouldn't work. It did. Her email inbox opened to hundreds of old archived messages, policy updates, vendor questions, spreadsheets, numbers, so many numbers. For a moment, She felt like she had stepped back into another life. A life where she had a desk, a routine, a future that made sense. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the first expense report William had sent for her to review. She checked the totals, the receipts, the vendor names. It was slow, and she had to rest often. But after an hour, she realized something important. She still knew how to do this. In the chair beside the bed, Annie woke up and saw the glow of the screen. "Mom," she whispered, "are you working?" Sarah looked at her and smiled in a way Annie had not seen in a long time. "Yes," she said softly, "I think I am." Annie smiled, then pulled the blanket closer and went back to sleep. Across the city, in his quiet apartment, William sat alone at his kitchen table with a glass of water and a stack of files Margaret had printed for him. They were old reports from the accounting department from the years Sarah had worked there. He didn't fully know what he was looking for yet, only that he had the growing feeling that Sarah's story was not just about illness or bad luck. Careful employees, people who never made mistakes. Those were the people who noticed things other people wanted to hide. He flipped through report after report, pages of numbers, vendor payments, insurance funds, safety budgets. Most of it looked normal, boring, even, the kind of paperwork that made up the invisible skeleton of a company. Then he saw something that made him stop. A series of payments labeled Safety Compliance Consulting. Large payments, very large, paid every quarter to the same consulting firm. He frowned. He didn't remember hiring a safety consulting firm at that level. His company had an internal safety division. They didn't usually outsource that kind of work. He picked up his phone and called Margaret. "Do we use a company called Redbridge Safety Consulting?" he asked. There was a pause while she typed. "Yes," she said. "They've been on contract for about 6 years. Who approved that contract?" he asked. "Let me check." It was signed off by the chief financial officer at the time, Daniel Hargrove. William leaned back in his chair. Daniel Hargrove had retired 3 years ago with a very generous retirement package and a speech about loyalty and growth. "How much have we paid them?" William asked. Margaret was quiet for a moment longer this time. "Over 6 years?" she said. "Approximately $8 million. William stared at the papers on his table. $8 million. He thought about Sarah, sitting in a hospital bed because she lost her insurance after losing a job she couldn't keep because she got sick. $8 million. "Margaret," he said slowly, "I want a full audit of every payment to that company. Quietly. Don't announce it. Don't email anyone about it. Just start pulling the records." Another pause. Margaret had worked with him long enough to recognize when something serious was happening. "Okay," she said. "William, what are you looking for?" He looked down at the numbers again. "I'm not sure yet," he said, "but I have a feeling that a woman who never made mistakes might have seen something she wasn't supposed to see." Back in the hospital room, Sarah finished reviewing her first batch of reports near midnight. It had taken her hours, but she had found 3 small calculation errors and 1 duplicate vendor charge that shouldn't have been approved. She wrote careful notes in the margin of the digital report and sent the file back. When she finished, she closed the laptop and sat there in the quiet room, listening to Annie breathe in her sleep. For the first time in more than a year, she did not feel completely powerless. She felt tired. She felt sick. She felt scared about the future. But she also felt something else. Useful. The next evening when William came in, Annie ran to him with a piece of paper. "I got an A on my spelling test," she announced proudly. "That's impressive," he said. "What word did you get wrong?" Annie looked embarrassed. "Restaurant," she said. "There are too many letters." William nodded seriously. "That's a very difficult word. Most adults can't spell it either." Sarah watched them from the bed, and for a moment, the room didn't feel like a hospital room. It felt like something else, something almost like a family dinner, the kind she used to imagine they would have before everything fell apart. "Mom worked today," Annie said proudly. "She found mistakes." William looked at Sarah. "I knew you would." Sarah held his gaze for a moment. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked quietly. "People like you don't usually spend their evenings in hospital rooms with people like us." He thought about that question carefully before answering. "Because," he said slowly, "I built a company that I thought was helping people build their lives. But I'm starting to think some people inside that company were using it to build something else. And I need someone who knows numbers and knows what it feels like when numbers are wrong to help me see the truth." Sarah looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded once. "Then I'll help you," she said. William began bringing Sarah printed reports instead of only sending digital files. "There's something about paper," he said one evening, placing a neat stack on the small hospital table. "People read more carefully when they can hold the numbers in their hands." Sarah almost smiled at that. "That's true," she said. "Numbers feel more real on paper. Harder to ignore." Annie was sitting on the floor with her notebook. She had drawn 3 people in front of the house herself, her mother, and a tall man in a suit. She hadn't shown the drawing to anyone yet. Sarah adjusted her glasses and began slowly going through the reports William had brought. Vendor payments, safety budgets, insurance allocations, construction site expense summaries. The work was slow because she tired easily, but William had learned not to rush her. Careful people could not be rushed. That was what made them careful. After about 20 minutes, Sarah stopped turning pages. She went back 3 pages and read a line again. Then she picked up a pen and circled something very slowly. "What is it?" William asked quietly. She didn't answer right away. She flipped back to another report in a different month, then another from a different year. She compared the numbers, her finger moving line by line. "This company," she said finally, tapping the paper. "Redbridge Safety Consulting. You said they were hired to review safety compliance, right?" "Yes," William said. "That's what the contract says." Sarah nodded slowly. "Then why are they billing you for equipment purchases?" William frowned. "What kind of equipment?" She turned the paper so he could see. "Harnesses, helmets, steel-toe boots. Those are physical safety supplies. Consulting firms don't buy equipment. They review procedures, they write reports, they do training. They don't order thousands of dollars of boots." William leaned closer to the paper. "Could they be managing purchasing?" he asked. Sarah shook her head slightly. "Then the invoices would come from the equipment suppliers, not from the consulting firm. Look here." She pointed to a line. "Redbridge billed you $48,000 for site safety equipment coordination. That's not a real accounting category. That's a sentence someone made up." Annie looked up from the floor. "Is someone in trouble?" she asked. William and Sarah exchanged a quick glance. "Maybe," William said. Sarah kept flipping pages, her movements getting more focused now, more energetic despite her illness. "It's not just one invoice," she said. "It's the same pattern over and over. Every few months. Large payments, vague descriptions, always approved by the same department. Finance," William said quietly. She nodded. "If I saw this when I was working there, I would have flagged it immediately." He looked at her. "Do you think you did see it?" Sarah was very quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," she said slowly. "But I remember something." She leaned back against the pillow, closing her eyes as if she were searching through old files in her mind. "About a year before I got really sick," she said, "I remember staying late one night because some numbers didn't match. There was a payment that had been recorded twice under 2 different categories. When I traced it back, it led to a vendor I didn't recognize. I wrote a note to my supervisor and asked if we should review the account." "What happened?" William asked. "My supervisor told me not to worry about it," she said. "He said it had already been approved at a higher level." "Did that happen often?" William asked. "No," she said. "That's why I remembered it." The room was very quiet now. Even Annie had stopped drawing and was watching them. "If someone was moving money through a fake consulting company," Sarah said slowly, thinking out loud, "they would need the payments to look official. Safety budgets are big. People don't question safety spending because no one wants to look like they don't care about workers. It would be the perfect place to hide money." William felt a cold, heavy feeling settle in his stomach. "How much money are we talking about?" he asked. Sarah looked at the stack of reports. "Just from what I've seen tonight," she said, "hundreds of thousands. Maybe more. Over several years." She looked up at him. "Million." Annie's small voice broke the silence. "Did they take the money from the workers?" she asked. Neither adult answered right away. Finally, William said quietly, "If what your mom is seeing is true, then yes. Some of that money was supposed to keep workers safe." Annie looked down at her drawing on the floor. She picked up her pencil and slowly erased something, then drew again. Sarah watched her daughter for a moment, then turned back to William. "If this is real," she said, Whoever did it would have needed help. You can't move that much money alone. Someone in finance. Maybe someone in management. Someone who knew how the system worked. William thought about Daniel Hargrove, the retired CFO who had approved the Redbridge contract. People trust numbers, Sarah continued. They think numbers don't lie. But numbers lie all the time. They lie for the people who write them. William stood up and walked to the window. The city lights were coming on outside, one by one, like small signals in the dark. If this is true, he said, then someone stole millions of dollars from the company, from the safety budget, from the workers, and from people like us, Sarah said quietly. He turned back to her. Why didn't anyone report this? She held his gaze. Maybe someone did, she said softly, and maybe no one listened. Annie walked over and stood next to her mother's bed. Mom, she said, is this why you lost your job? Sarah looked at her daughter, then at William. I don't know, she said honestly. But sometimes when you see something you're not supposed to see, the world finds a way to make you go away. William felt those words settle heavily in the room. He looked at the papers again, at the circled numbers, at the fake descriptions, at the signatures approving payments no one had questioned for years. For the first time, he realized this was no longer just about helping a sick former employee and her daughter. This was about something much bigger. And somewhere in the middle of all those numbers and signatures and fake companies, there was a truth that had cost Sarah her job, her health, and almost her future. William looked at her and said quietly, I think you're right. I think you saw something back then. And I think someone made sure you couldn't do anything about it. Sarah didn't look surprised. She just looked tired. I remember writing a note, she said softly. I remember printing a copy of one of the reports because the numbers didn't make sense. I took it home because I wanted to look at it with a clear head. She paused. I never brought it back. William leaned forward slightly. Do you still have it? Sarah looked at him. Yes, she said. Sarah's answer hung in the air between them. Yes, she said. William did not speak immediately. He had learned, over many years of negotiations, that silence often made people say more than questions did. But this silence felt different. This wasn't a business silence. This was the kind of silence that sits in a room when the past is about to walk back in. You still have the report? He asked quietly. Sarah nodded. I think so. I kept a few papers from that time. Important ones. I didn't know why, I just felt like I shouldn't throw them away. Where are they? He asked. At home, she said. In a box in the closet. I haven't opened that box in a long time. Annie looked between them. Is it like a treasure box? She asked. Sarah smiled faintly. No, sweetheart. Not treasure. Just old papers. William shook his head slightly. Sometimes old papers are more valuable than treasure, he said. Sarah studied his face. If I give you that report, she said slowly, what happens next? William didn't want to lie to her. If what we think is true, he said, then someone stole a lot of money. And if they stole that much money, they won't want anyone to find out. Annie frowned. So they're bad people? William looked at her. Yes, he said. But bad people don't usually think they're bad. They just think they won't get caught. Sarah leaned back against the pillow, suddenly looking more tired. I remember that night, she said quietly. The night I printed that report. Everyone had gone home. The office was almost empty. I remember looking at the numbers and feeling like something was wrong. Not a small mistake. Something big, something hidden. She closed her eyes, trying to remember. I printed the report and put it in my bag, she continued. I told myself I would check it again at home, just to be sure before I said anything. I didn't want to accuse anyone if I was wrong. William nodded. Careful people always double-checked before they spoke. The next week, I got called into HR about my sick days, she said. They said my performance was slipping. A month later, I was let go. The room was very quiet. You think it was because of the report, William said. I don't know, she replied. But the timing, she didn't finish the sentence. Annie was very still now, listening in the way children do when they know something important is being said. Mom, she said quietly, are those the people who made you lose your job? Sarah looked at her daughter and didn't know how to answer that without taking away some of the little faith Annie still had in the world. "I don't know," she said again softly. "But sometimes when people have a lot to lose, they do things they're not proud of." William stood up and walked slowly to the window again. Night had fallen, and the city was full of lights. Somewhere out there was Sarah's apartment. Somewhere in that apartment was a box in a closet. And inside that box might be a piece of paper that could explain everything. "We need that report," he said finally. Sarah gave a small, tired laugh. "I can't exactly walk out of here and go get it." "I know," he said. "Do you have a key?" She nodded toward Annie's small jacket hanging on the chair. "There's a spare key in her coat pocket. I made her carry it in case." She stopped herself. "In case what?" William asked gently. "In case something happened to me and she needed to go home," Sarah said quietly. William felt that heavy feeling in his chest again. "I can go get the box," he said. Sarah looked at him for a long moment. "You would do that?" "Yes," he said, "but I need the address." She told him the address. A small apartment on the south side. 3rd floor. No elevator. The key was in Annie's coat pocket. Just like she said, Annie walked over to her coat and reached into the pocket, pulling out a small silver key on a piece of blue string. She held it out to William. "This is the house key," she said. Then she added very seriously, "Please don't lose it. We don't have another one." William took the key carefully, like it was something fragile. "I won't lose it," he said. Annie looked at him for a moment, then said, "When I grow up and have money, I will pay you back for the soup. And for helping my mom. I'm Annie. I keep my promises." William closed his hand around the small key and nodded. "I know you do," he said. Later that night, he drove to the address Sarah had given him. The neighborhood was quiet. The kind of quiet that comes from people working too hard and sleeping too little. The building was old, the paint peeling near the stairs, the hallway lights dim. He climbed 3 flights of stairs and found the apartment number Sarah had told him. He stood there for a moment, looking at the door, thinking about how different this door was from the doors he usually walked through: glass office doors, conference room doors, doors that opened because people were waiting for him. This door opened with a small silver key on a blue string. Inside, the apartment was small but clean, a couch that had been used for many years, a small kitchen table with 2 chairs, a bookshelf with Annie's school books and a few old accounting textbooks. On the wall, there were a few drawings, Annie's drawings, houses, trees, a sun in the corner of the page. William walked slowly to the bedroom. The closet was small. There were only a few clothes hanging inside. On the floor, in the back, was a cardboard box. He picked it up and carried it to the kitchen table. When he opened it, he found old bills, medical papers, school papers, envelopes, and at the bottom, a manila folder. He opened the folder and pulled out a printed report. Numbers, vendor names, payment approvals. At the top of the page was a company name, Redbridge Safety Consulting, and across one line, circled in pen, were numbers that did not make sense. At the bottom of the page was a small handwritten note. "These numbers don't match. Payment approved twice. Why?" S. Williams. William sat down slowly in the small kitchen chair, the paper in his hands. In that quiet apartment, with a child's drawings on the wall and unpaid bills in a box, he realized something that no board meeting, no financial report, no business magazine had ever taught him. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in the world is not a gun or a knife or a bad man shouting. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in the world is a piece of paper with the truth written on it, and no one important willing to read it. William did not take the box with him right away. He sat in the small apartment for a long time, the report still in his hands, Annie's drawings taped to the wall in front of him. One drawing showed a house with a big window and smoke coming out of the chimney. 3 people stood in front of the house holding hands. Above them, Annie had written in large, uneven letters, "Home." He looked at that drawing for a long time. Then he looked back down at the report Sarah had printed years ago. The circled numbers were clear. One payment recorded twice. Same amount. Same vendor. Approved by the same department. It wasn't a typing error. It wasn't a misplaced decimal. It was deliberate. He took out his phone and took pictures of every page in the folder. then carefully placed the report back exactly where he had found it. He put the folder back into the box back into the closet, and locked the apartment door behind him when he left. The next morning, he did not go to his office first. He went to the hospital. Annie was sitting in the chair eating a banana and reading a small book when he walked in. She looked up and smiled when she saw him. "You came back," she said again, like she was still surprised every time. "I told you I would," he said. Sarah looked at him, searching his face. "You found it," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," he said, pulling a chair closer to the bed. "I found it." He didn't take the papers out right away. Instead, he said, "You were right. The same payment was recorded twice. Same amount. Same vendor. It wasn't an accident." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, not because she was surprised, but because hearing the truth out loud made it real in a way that memory never was. "I knew it," she whispered. "I knew something was wrong." Annie looked between them. "Is it bad?" she asked. William looked at her and nodded slowly. "Yes," he said. "It's bad." Sarah opened her eyes again. "What happens now?" she asked. William leaned back in the chair, choosing his words carefully. "Now we have proof that money was moved in a way it shouldn't have been. But one report isn't enough. We need to see how big this is, how long it's been happening, and who signed the approvals." Sarah nodded slowly. "Follow the signatures," she said. "Numbers tell you what happened. Signatures tell you who let it happen." William almost smiled. "That's exactly right." Annie slid off the chair and walked over to the bed. "Are the bad people going to go to jail?" she asked. Neither adult answered immediately. "I don't know yet," William said honestly. "But I know we're going to find the truth." Annie thought about that, then nodded. "Okay," she said, "because my mom says the truth is important even when it's scary." Sarah reached out and squeezed Annie's hand gently. "I did say that," she said softly. Later that day, William called Margaret into his office and closed the door. "I need you to bring me every payment ever made to Redbridge Safety Consulting," he said. "Every invoice, every approval form, every signature." Margaret looked at him carefully. "This is bigger than a routine audit, isn't it?" she said. "Yes," he replied. "It is." She hesitated for a moment. "If this goes where I think it might go," she said, "some very important people are going to be very nervous." William nodded. They should be. By the end of the week, his office table was covered in files. Payment records going back 6 years. Approval forms. Internal emails. Vendor contracts. He worked late into the night, sometimes alone, sometimes with Margaret, sometimes with Sarah on the laptop from her hospital bed, reviewing numbers together over the phone. They began to see the pattern clearly. Every few months, a large invoice from Redbridge. Vague description. Approved by finance. Paid without question. Sometimes the same amount appeared again under a different category weeks later. Small enough each time not to trigger alarms. Large enough over years to become millions. And always, somewhere on the approval line, the same name appeared. Daniel Hargrove, former chief financial officer. Retired, respected, wealthy. William leaned back in his chair and stared at the name. "He signed everything," he said quietly into the phone. On the other end, in the hospital room, Sarah was silent for a long moment. "He was the one who told my supervisor not to worry about the numbers," she said finally. "I remember now. My supervisor said, 'This came from Hargrove's office, don't touch it.'" William closed his eyes for a moment. Pieces were falling into place now, and he didn't like the picture they were forming. "If he created a fake consulting company," William said slowly, thinking out loud, "he could approve the payments himself. No one would question the CFO. He could move money for years and no one would notice if the reports looked clean." "Unless someone careful looked too closely," Sarah said. "Unless someone like you looked too closely," William replied. There was a long silence on the phone. "Do you think he knew that I knew?" Sarah asked quietly. William didn't want to answer that question, but he had promised himself he wouldn't lie to her. "Yes," he said finally, "I think he did." In the hospital room, Sarah looked at Annie, who was coloring quietly at the small table. "I lost my job," she said slowly, more to herself than to William. "I lost my insurance. I lost my health. And Annie lost her childhood. She swallowed. All because I saw numbers that didn't make sense. William gripped the phone a little tighter. Then we make it make sense now, he said. We finish what you started. Annie looked up from her coloring. Mom, she said. When the bad man gets in trouble, does that mean you can come home? Sarah looked at her daughter, then out the window, then down at the laptop where years of numbers were finally starting to tell the truth. I hope so, she said softly. By the time William reached chapter 10 of the investigation in his own mind, he understood one thing very clearly. This was no longer a quiet internal problem. This was fraud. Large-scale, deliberate fraud, hidden inside something as untouchable as worker safety. And the man who had signed the papers had walked away 3 years ago with a retirement party, a gold watch, and a speech about integrity. That night, William sat in his office long after everyone else had gone home. The city lights reflected off the glass walls, turning his office into a mirror where he could see himself sitting alone at the long conference table, surrounded by files. In front of him were 3 stacks of paper: Redbridge invoices, internal approval forms, insurance and safety budget reports. He had spent the last week building a timeline. Sarah helped from the hospital, line by line, number by number, circling patterns, marking duplicates, highlighting approvals. Now the timeline was clear. Redbridge Safety Consulting had been created 6.5 years ago. The first large payment had been approved 1 month later. Over the next 6 years, the company had billed Carter Group regularly for safety compliance coordination, equipment oversight, risk management consulting, and other vague descriptions that sounded official enough that no one asked questions. The total amount paid so far, 846万6000美元. William stared at the final number for a long time. Then he picked up the phone and called his lawyer. Her name was Linda Perez, and she had been the company's external legal counsel for years. She was known for 2 things. She did not scare easily, and she did not talk more than necessary. I need you in my office tomorrow morning, William said. Early. And Linda, this conversation does not leave the room. She was quiet for a moment. That's serious? She asked. Yes, he said. That's serious. The next morning, Linda sat across from him at the long table, reading the documents one by one. She didn't interrupt. She didn't react. She just read, occasionally making a small note with her pen. When she finished, she placed the papers down very neatly and looked at William. How many people know about this? She asked. 3, he said. You, me, and the woman who first found the discrepancy 5 years ago. Where is she now? Linda asked. In a hospital bed, William said, because she lost her job and her insurance. Linda held his gaze for a long moment. And the child? She asked. She's the reason I found out, he said quietly. Linda leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. All right, she said. Then here's the situation. If this is real, and it looks very real, then your former CFO created a shell company, approved payments to that company, and moved company money into accounts he controlled. That's fraud, embezzlement, and probably tax evasion. William nodded once. What do? We don't go to the board yet, she said immediately. If anyone else is involved, you warn them, and they start destroying evidence. We go to federal investigators first. Quietly. We bring them the documents. We let them build the case. William stood up and walked to the window again. And the company? He asked. What happens when this becomes public? Linda didn't soften the answer. It's going to be ugly, she said. Stock will drop. The board will panic. The press will have a field day. They'll say you didn't know what was happening in your own company. William nodded slowly. Maybe I didn't, he said. Linda watched him carefully. Most CEOs would be asking how to protect the company right now, she said. You're asking how to report it. William looked out at the city for a long moment before answering. A little girl tried to give me $3.75 for a bowl of soup, he said quietly. That was everything she had in the world, and she was willing to give it away so her mother could eat. If I protect $8 million instead of the truth, then I don't deserve to run anything. Linda studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. All right, she said. Then we do this the right way. That evening, William went back to the hospital. Annie was sitting on the bed this time, reading out loud to her mother from a school book, and the man traveled a long way to find the truth. Annie read slowly, sounding out the longer words. She looked up when William walked in. "We're reading a story," she said. "It's about a man looking for the truth." William pulled a chair closer. "That sounds like a good story," he said. Sarah looked at his face and immediately knew something had changed. "You know who did it?" she said quietly. "Yes," he said. "And?" she asked. "And we're going to the authorities," he said. "This isn't just a company problem. It's a crime." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment. Not out of fear, out of relief. "I thought I was crazy," she said softly. "All those years I thought maybe I made a mistake." "You didn't," William said. "You were right." Annie looked between them. "Does that mean the bad man is going to jail?" she asked. William looked at her and said, very gently, "It means the bad man is going to have to answer for what he did." Annie thought about that, then nodded. "Good," she said, "because my mom said numbers are like truth. They don't change just because someone important says they should." Sarah looked at her daughter with tired eyes and a small smile. "I did say that," she said. William sat there with them for a while, in the small hospital room where this whole story had really begun, with a bowl of soup, a handful of coins, and a child who kept her promises. And as he watched Annie read to her mother, he realized something else. This was no longer just about proving a crime. This was about finishing something that should have been finished years ago. On the night, a careful accountant printed a report, circled a number, and wrote in the margin, "These numbers don't match." 2 weeks later, the hospital room did not feel as heavy as it once had, but the air was filled with something else now waiting. Sarah was getting a little stronger. Not well, not yet, but stronger. She could sit up longer. She could work for an hour without needing to sleep. The color in her face had slowly begun to return, and the nurses had started using words like improving and responding to treatment. But the biggest change was not medical. It was the investigation. William had done exactly what Linda advised. Quietly, carefully, he handed everything to federal investigators: every invoice, every approval form, every payment record, and the printed report Sarah had saved in a box in her closet for 5 years. Now there was nothing to do but wait. That Tuesday morning, Annie was sitting by the window doing her homework when William walked into the room. She smiled when she saw him, but this time she didn't run to him right away. She had learned that when adults were quiet and serious, something important was happening. "You look like when teachers are about to give a big test," Annie said. William smiled a little. "Do I look that nervous?" "A little," Annie said. Sarah looked at him carefully. "You heard something," she said. William nodded and pulled the chair closer to the bed. He didn't speak immediately. He looked at Annie, then back at Sarah. "The investigators called this morning," he said. Sarah's hands tightened slightly around the blanket. "And they opened a formal case," he said. "They traced the Redbridge Company to a shell corporation registered under a different name. That corporation leads to an account controlled by Daniel Hargrove." Sarah closed her eyes slowly, not shocked, not angry, just tired in a way that had nothing to do with illness. "And the others?" she asked quietly. "There are 2 more people involved," William said. "One in finance, one in vendor approvals. They've been moving money for years." Annie looked confused. "Moving money where?" she asked. William thought for a moment. "Imagine if your school gave money to buy books for kids," he said. "But instead of buying books, someone took the money and put it in their own pocket." Annie's eyes widened. "That's stealing." "Yes," he said. "It is." Sarah looked out the window. "All those years," she said softly, "all those workers who thought the company didn't have enough money for better safety equipment. All those families who thought there just wasn't enough budget." She shook her head slightly. "There was money. Someone just took it." William didn't try to defend the company. There was nothing to defend. "They're going to make arrests," he said quietly. The room went very still. "When?" Sarah asked. "Soon," he said. "The investigators wanted to know if you would be willing to testify. You're the first person who flagged the numbers. Your report is the earliest record we have." Sarah didn't answer right away. Annie looked up at her mother, sensing that this question mattered. "Mom?" Annie said softly. Sarah looked at her daughter for a long time. Then she looked at William. "I was so scared back then," she said quietly. "I had Annie." I had medical bills. I had no one to help me. I saw something wrong. And I didn't fight. I just tried to survive. She swallowed. I've regretted that for years. You were sick and alone, William said. That's not weakness. That's reality. She shook her head slightly. Maybe, she said. But this time, I'm not alone. She looked at Annie, then back at William. Yes, she said. I'll testify. Annie didn't fully understand what testify meant, but she understood the tone in her mother's voice. It was the voice her mother used when she was scared but decided to be brave anyway. Does that mean the truth wins? Annie asked. Sarah reached out and touched her daughter's face gently. I hope so, she said. A week later, the news broke. It was on every channel, every newspaper, every business website. Former CFO of Carter Group under federal investigation. Millions in safety funds allegedly embezzled. Internal accounting report first flagged discrepancies years ago. William watched the news alone in his office. They showed pictures of Daniel Hargrove leaving a courthouse, his face hard, his lawyer walking beside him. They showed the Carter Group building. They showed charts and numbers and words like fraud and embezzlement and corporate oversight failure. They did not show Sarah. They did not show Annie. But William knew this story had really started in a hospital cafeteria with a girl who didn't have enough money for soup. That evening, he went to the hospital again. Annie ran to him this time. We saw you on TV, she said. They said your company on the news. Yeah, he said. They did. Are you in trouble? She asked. He thought about it, then nodded a little. A little, he said. Annie took his hand and pulled him toward the chair. It's okay, she said. You can sit with us, remember? Mom says it's better when people are not alone when they're in trouble. Sarah smiled softly from the bed. William sat down in the chair, in the same small room where this whole story had begun to change. Daniel Hargrove was arrested this afternoon, he said quietly. Sarah closed her eyes and let out a long breath she felt like she had been holding for 5 years. It's over? She asked. William shook his head slightly. No, he said. But the truth is finally louder than the lies. Annie climbed back onto the chair and picked up her book again. Do you want me to keep reading the story about the man looking for the truth? She asked. William nodded. Yes, he said. I'd like that. So Annie began reading again, slowly, carefully, sounding out the big words. While outside the hospital window the city moved and the world kept going, and inside that small room 3 people sat together, one who had lost everything, one who was trying to make things right, and one small girl who had started it all with $3.75 and a promise she intended to keep. The day Sarah was discharged from the hospital, it was raining. Not a heavy storm, just a steady gray rain that made the city look softer, quieter, like everything was being given a chance to start over. Annie stood by the window in the hospital room, watching the drops slide down the glass. Do you think the rain means something good or something sad? Annie asked. Sarah folded her few clothes slowly and placed them into a small bag. I think, she said, rain means something is growing somewhere, even if we can't see it yet. William was standing near the door, holding a folder from the hospital billing office. The final paperwork, the final numbers that had once looked impossible. I spoke with the hospital this morning, he said. Your insurance is active now. The job paperwork went through. Most of the remaining bill will be covered under the new plan. Sarah stopped folding for a moment. Even after all the weeks that had passed, she still wasn't used to hearing sentences like that. And the rest? She asked quietly. William held up the folder. The rest will be handled through the company's victim compensation fund, he said. The board approved it yesterday. Sarah looked at him. Victim, she repeated softly, like it was a strange word she wasn't sure belonged to her. You were, he said. You just didn't know the whole story yet. Annie turned from the window. Does that mean we can go home? She asked. Sarah smiled at her. Yes, she said. We can go home. Annie didn't cheer. She didn't jump. She just smiled a big, quiet smile and picked up her mother's bag like she had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. When they walked out of the hospital together, Annie held her mother's hand on one side and William walked on the other, carrying the small bag. To anyone passing by, they might have looked like a family leaving after a long visit. Outside, The rain was still falling lightly. William opened an umbrella and held it over Sarah and Annie as they walked to the car. "You don't have to drive us," Sarah said. "We can take the bus." "I know," he said, "but today I want to." They drove to the small apartment on the south side. The same building. The same stairs. The same door, with the small lock and the blue string key. When Sarah stepped inside, she stopped for a moment and looked around like she was seeing the place for the first time. The couch, the small kitchen table, Annie's drawings on the wall, the box in the closet that had held the truth for 5 years. "Home," Annie said, putting the bag down. Sarah sat slowly on the couch and let out a long breath. Not the tired breath from the hospital. A different breath. The kind people take when they are somewhere safe. William stood near the door, not wanting to step too far into their space. "I'll let you two get settled," he said. Annie walked over to him. "Wait," she said, and ran to the small table. She picked up a piece of paper and brought it back. It was the drawing she had been working on days ago. The house with the big window and the tree, 3 people standing in front of it. "I drew this," she said, handing it to him. "That's me and my mom. And that's you. Because you helped us come home." William took the drawing carefully. He didn't trust his voice right away, so he just nodded. "Thank you," he said finally. Annie looked very serious again. "I didn't forget," she said. "My name is Annie. When I grow up and have money, I will pay you back for the soup." William knelt down slightly so he was at her eye level. "Annie," he said. "You already paid me back." She frowned. "I did?" "Yes," he said. "You reminded me who I was supposed to be." She thought about that for a long moment, then nodded like she accepted that as a fair answer. Over the next few weeks, life began to change slowly. Sarah worked from the small kitchen table, the laptop open, papers neatly stacked beside her. The first time her paycheck was deposited, she stared at the number on the screen for a long time before closing the laptop and crying quietly in the kitchen where Annie wouldn't see. Annie went to school during the day and did her homework at the same table at night. Sometimes William came by in the evenings, not with hospital food anymore, but with groceries, real groceries, milk, bread, eggs, fruit. One evening, as they sat at the small table eating chicken soup again, but this time from their own pot on their own stove, Annie looked at both of them and said, "When I grow up, I want to have a place where people can come eat if they don't have money." Sarah looked at her. "Like a restaurant?" Annie shook her head. "No, not a restaurant, because restaurants are for people who have money. I want a place for people who don't." William looked at her across the table. "That's a very big idea," he said. Annie shrugged a little. "It started with soup," she said. "So I think soup is a good place to start." Sarah reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand, and William, sitting at that small table in a small apartment, realized that sometimes the biggest changes in the world don't start in boardrooms or banks or government offices. Sometimes they start with a child who is brave enough to say, "I can't afford soup for my mom," and honest enough to promise, "When I grow up, I will pay you back." A year passed quietly, the way important years often do, not with big moments every day, but with small changes that slowly build a new life. Sarah worked from the small kitchen table every morning. The laptop William had given her was always open by 8 o'clock, a cup of coffee beside it. Her reading glasses low on her nose as she checked reports line by line. She still worked slowly, but she was known now for something very specific inside the company. If Sarah Williams reviewed a report, the numbers were right. Her health was not perfect, but it was stable. The new insurance covered her medication, her checkups, her therapy. The doctors said words like manageable and long-term recovery, which were words that meant she would be there when Annie came home from school, and that was all that mattered to either of them. Annie had grown taller that year. Not just taller in height, but taller in the way she spoke, the way she thought, the way she watched the world carefully before deciding what she believed about it. William still visited, but not as often as before. Not because he didn't care, but because he understood something important. They didn't need saving anymore. They needed space to live, but he never stopped being part of their lives. One Saturday afternoon, he stopped by the apartment and found Annie sitting at the kitchen table with a notebook, writing very seriously. "What are you working on?" he asked. Annie looked up. A plan, she said. What kind of plan? A soup plan, she said. He pulled out a chair and sat across from her. That sounds important. It is, she said, and turned the notebook around so he could see. On the page was a drawing of a small building with a sign above the door that said, Soup. I told you before, she said. When I grow up, I want a place where people can eat if they don't have money. I'm planning it. William looked at the drawing carefully, like it was an architectural blueprint. Every good idea needs a plan, he said. What kind of soup are you going to serve? Chicken soup, Annie said immediately. Because that's what started everything. Sarah, standing at the stove, listened quietly, a small smile on her face. And vegetable soup, Annie continued, pointing to another drawing. Because some people don't eat chicken. And tomato soup. And bread. You have to have bread. William nodded seriously. You've thought about this a lot. Annie looked at him very seriously. Some people are hungry and they don't tell anyone, she said. That's the worst kind of hungry. William didn't answer right away, because he knew she wasn't just talking about food. A few weeks later, William invited Annie and Sarah to visit one of the Carter Group buildings downtown. Annie had never been inside a building that tall before. She stood in the lobby, looking up at the ceiling that seemed too high to be real. Do you work here? She asked. Yes, William said. She looked around at the marble floors, the glass walls, the people in suits walking quickly with coffee in their hands. Do they know about the soup? She asked. William looked down at her. Not yet, he said. But they will. They went up to the top floor, to a conference room with windows that looked out over the entire city. Annie walked straight to the window and put her hands against the glass. You can see everything from here, she said. Yes, William replied. You can. Sarah sat quietly at the long table, still not fully comfortable in places like this, places that had once been part of the world that had pushed her out. William stood at the head of the table and looked at both of them. I asked you here today, he said, because the company is starting a new program, a community fund. It's going to support worker families, medical emergencies, and food programs in the neighborhoods where our employees live. Sarah looked at him surprised. That's a big program, she said. It should have existed a long time ago, he replied. Then he looked at Annie. And part of that program, he said, is going to help start a small place that serves soup to people who can't afford it. Annie's eyes widened. A soup place? She said. Yes, he said, but it won't be my soup place. It will be yours. You'll help design it. You'll help decide what kind of soup. And when you're older, if you still want to run it, it will be yours to run. Annie stared at him like she wasn't sure she had heard correctly. But I don't have money, she said. William smiled gently. You tried to give me $3.75 when you thought your mother was hungry, he said. That was more than money. That was character. I'm just investing in it. Sarah covered her mouth with her hand, tears filling her eyes again, but these were not the same tears she had cried in the hospital. Annie walked slowly over to the big table and looked at the city again. Can we put the soup place near the hospital? She asked. Because that's where people are the most scared and the most hungry. William nodded. Yes, he said. That's exactly where we'll put it. Annie turned back to him and said, very seriously, then I will work very hard. Because I told you I would pay you back. William shook his head gently. Annie, he said, this was never a loan. She thought about that for a long moment, then said, then it's a promise. He nodded. Yes, he said, it's a promise. 5 years later, on a cold morning in early November, Annie stood on the sidewalk across the street from St. Mary's Hospital and looked at the small building with the new sign above the door. The sign read, Annie's Soup House. No one eats alone. She stood very still for a long moment, her hands in the pockets of her coat, the same way she used to stand in the hospital cafeteria when she was small, counting coins and trying to be brave. But she was not that same little girl anymore. She was taller now, her shoulders straighter, her voice calmer, but her eyes were the same. The same careful eyes that noticed when someone was hungry. The same eyes that had once looked up at a stranger and said, I can't afford soup for my mom. Behind her, Sarah locked the car and walked up beside her. Her health was not perfect, but she was strong enough to work, strong enough to walk without getting tired, strong enough to live a life that once seemed impossible. You ready? Sarah asked gently. Annie nodded. Yeah, she said, I'm ready. Across the street, William stood near the door of the soup house, talking to a few people from the neighborhood and two reporters holding cameras. He was older now, a little more gray in his hair, but there was something lighter in his face than there had been years ago, like he was no longer carrying something alone. When Annie and Sarah walked up, he turned and smiled. "Well," he said, "the owner is here. I guess we can open." Annie looked at the sign again. "I'm not really the owner," she said. William shook his head. "You are," he said. "You just don't get the bills yet." She laughed a little at that. A small group of people had gathered: hospital workers, a few construction workers from Carter Group, some people from the neighborhood, and a few people who looked like they had come because they heard there would be free food. William stepped slightly to the side. "Do you want to say something?" he asked Annie. She looked nervous for the first time that morning. "I don't know what to say. Just tell the truth," Sarah said quietly. "That's always enough." Annie nodded slowly and stepped up in front of the door. She looked at the people standing there, then at the hospital across the street, then back at the people. "A long time ago," she began, "my mom was in that hospital." She pointed across the street. "She was very sick, and we didn't have enough money for food. I went to buy soup, but I didn't have enough money." She paused, then smiled a little. "I asked if I could buy half a bowl. Some people in the small crowd smiled softly, and a man standing behind me bought the soup," she said, glancing at William. "I told him I would pay him back when I grew up. He told me to keep my money." She looked back at the sign above the door. "This place is how I'm paying him back," she said. "But it's not just for him. It's for anyone who is tired, or scared, or hungry, or sitting in that hospital wishing they had something warm to eat. Here, you don't have to have money, you just have to be hungry." The street was very quiet when she finished speaking. William reached over and opened the door to the soup house. Inside, the room was warm and bright. There were simple wooden tables, a long counter, and behind the counter, 3 large silver pots sat on warmers: chicken soup, tomato soup, vegetable soup, and next to the register, there was a small wooden box with a sign that read, "If you can pay, you can help someone else. If you can't pay, just eat." The first person to walk in was an older man in a hospital wristband. He moved slowly, like walking hurt, and he looked unsure, like he wasn't certain he was allowed to be there. Annie walked up to him with a bowl and a spoon. "What kind of soup would you like?" she asked. The man looked at her. "How much is it?" he asked. Annie smiled gently. "It's already paid for," she said. He looked confused. "Paid for by who?" Annie thought for a moment, then said, "By someone who knows what it feels like to be hungry." The man nodded slowly and pointed to the chicken soup. Annie filled a bowl and handed it to him carefully, the same way she had once carried a bowl down a hospital hallway for her mother. William stood in the corner of the room, watching quietly as people came in, some who could pay, some who couldn't, some who put a few dollars in the wooden box, some who just said thank you and sat down with a warm bowl in their hands. Sarah walked over and stood next to him. "You changed our lives," she said quietly. William shook his head slightly. "No," he said. "You changed mine." Across the room, Annie was helping a woman with 2 small children carry soup to a table. She moved quickly, confidently, like she belonged exactly where she was. William watched her for a long moment, then said softly, almost to himself, "All of this started because a little girl tried to buy half a bowl of soup." Sarah followed his gaze and smiled. "And because a man decided to listen," she said. Near the door, Annie had hung her first drawing in a simple frame. The drawing of a small house, a tree, and 3 people holding hands in front of it. Under the drawing, there was a small handwritten sign: "No child should ever have to buy soup alone." This story is not really about money, or business, or even justice. It is about how a small act of kindness can change the direction of many lives. A little girl did not ask for charity. She only wanted her mother not to be hungry. She was willing to give everything she had, just a few coins, because love, not money, was her greatest wealth. The billionaire did not help her because he was rich. He helped her because he finally learned to see people behind the numbers. The lesson of this story is simple but powerful. We never truly know how much someone is carrying in their life. So when we have the chance to be kind, we should take it. Because sometimes a bowl of soup is not just food, it is dignity, hope, and the beginning of justice. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.